Imagine walking into a hotel after a long journey, hoping for a peaceful night's rest, only to be met with a shocking and humiliating experience. This is exactly what happened to a black veteran with PTSD, a man who has served his country and now relies on a service dog to help him navigate daily life. What should have been a simple check-in turned into a nightmare when the hotel manager, who clearly had no understanding of PTSD or the role of service animals, decided to mock him. What started as an insensitive comment quickly escalated into a confrontation that would change the course of the manager's day. This is more than just a story about a misunderstanding. It's about dignity, respect, and the importance of standing up for what's right. The manager, oblivious to the consequences of his actions, thought he could get away with mocking a man who had fought for his freedom. But what happened next was something no one could have predicted. As tensions rose, the manager found himself facing a reality he hadn't anticipated, one that would force him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about respect, power, and empathy. Stay tuned to find out how this intense encounter unfolds and how the manager's regret came a lot sooner than he ever expected. The veteran, let's call him James, had been traveling for hours, fighting fatigue and the constant battle within his own mind. He had served overseas, seen things no one should ever have to witness, and now he was doing his best to rebuild a life back home. His service dog, a calm and well-trained animal, was more than just a companion. It was his lifeline. With each step, the dog helped ease the anxiety, the flashbacks, and the moments when the world felt like it was spinning out of control. James had learned to trust the dog, and in return, it provided him with a sense of stability that he could rely on. As he entered the hotel lobby, he hoped for a simple, quiet check-in. The receptionist greeted him, and things seemed to be going smoothly, until the manager stepped into the scene. The man who had been standing behind the counter took one look at James and his service dog and immediately made a judgment. Without any regard for the legal protections or the emotional toll PTSD takes on a person, he smirked and made an inappropriate comment about the dog, assuming James was taking advantage of the situation. The tension in the room was palpable. James felt the sting of the manager's words, but he held his ground. He knew he had every right to be there, but the mockery wasn't just hurtful, it was dehumanizing. As he prepared to respond, a silence fell over the lobby, and it was clear this was about to escalate in a way no one could have expected. James stood there for a moment, staring at the hotel manager. The words the man had spoken hung in the air, mocking and dismissive, like an invisible weight pressing down on his chest. His heart pounded, but he didn't react immediately. He couldn't let himself get caught in the anger. He had dealt with this before, these small slights from people who didn't understand what it meant to live with PTSD. He wanted to walk away, but something inside him refused to let it go this time. The manager, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, continued to smirk, clearly convinced he was in the right. "Do you really need that dog in here?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "We don't allow pets, you know." James' hand clenched into a fist. He had been through enough to know that it wasn't just about the dog or the hotel rules. It was about respect, or the lack of it. The fact that the manager didn't even pause to consider that James might be a veteran with PTSD, someone with legal rights to have the service dog by his side, only added fuel to the fire. But the worst part? The manager's smug attitude, as if he held all the power in the situation. In the background, a few other guests glanced nervously between the two men, sensing the growing tension. James could feel their eyes on him, but he ignored them. He wasn't here to prove anything to anyone. But when the manager stepped forward, his voice a little too loud for comfort, it felt like everything shifted. "I don't care what your dog's supposed to do. Rules are rules, The manager continued, his words sharp. James took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. He had every right to be there, and he wouldn't let this man undermine him. But as the silence stretched, it became clear that the manager wasn't backing down. James could feel the tension tightening in his chest. The manager's voice was growing louder, more forceful, as if he was trying to assert his authority in a situation where, frankly, he had no business doing so. The lobby around them seemed to grow quieter with each passing second. The air felt thick, like something was about to explode. James glanced down at his service dog, still calm and alert beside him, sensing the unease in the room. The dog was a lifeline, an anchor. It wasn't just there for companionship, it was there to help him through moments like this. But even that comfort wasn't enough to keep his nerves from fraying. "Sir," the manager said, his words dripping with arrogance, "if you don't remove that animal, I'll have no choice but to call security." He was standing now, looming over the counter, his eyes locked on James, challenging him to defy him. The threat was clear, and the line had been crossed. James' heart raced as the manager's words sank in. What was he supposed to do now? He was a veteran. He had the right to be there. But with every word the manager spat, it felt less like a mistake and more like an intentional attempt to degrade him. The anger that James had been holding back began to surge, but he quickly shoved it down. He couldn't let this escalate into something physical. Not here. Not now. A few people in the lobby shifted uncomfortably, sensing the impending conflict. One older woman, who had been silently watching the scene unfold, spoke up timidly. "Sir, I think you should listen to him. That's a service dog." Her voice was soft but carried a certain weight, an unexpected ally in the midst of the tension. But the manager didn't seem to care. "No," he snapped, "I don't need anyone's opinion. I'm in charge here." His words were sharp, and his face flushed with irritation. James could feel the heat rising in his own body. He was tired of being misunderstood, tired of fighting for something that should have been simple. But now it wasn't just about the dog. It wasn't just about the hotel rules. It was about respect. It was about standing up, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked or ridiculed. James looked the manager dead in the eye. He knew what was coming, and he wasn't going to back down. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft breathing of the dog at his side. This moment was reaching its breaking point. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. And then, just as the manager took a step closer, something unexpected happened that would change everything. Just as the manager leaned in, his hand reaching toward the phone to call security, the lobby doors swung open with a sharp creak. Everyone's attention snapped toward the newcomer, another man, tall and imposing, with a military demeanor. He was in full uniform, his hat slightly askew, as though he had just arrived from a long day of work. But it wasn't his uniform that immediately caught everyone's attention. It was the way he walked, with an air of purpose, and the way his gaze locked onto the situation, as if he already knew what was happening. Without missing a beat, the man approached the counter, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. He didn't even address the manager at first. Instead, he looked directly at James. "You okay, brother?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. There was a certain strength in his tone that sent a ripple through the room. James, though momentarily caught off guard, nodded. He didn't have time to explain, and he wasn't sure if he even needed to. The presence of this new man, this fellow veteran, was like a breath of fresh air, something to hold on to in the storm of tension. But the manager, clearly frustrated by this sudden interruption, snapped, "Excuse me, this is none of your business. I'm handling this." The new arrival didn't flinch. Instead, he turned his attention fully to the manager. "It is my business," he said evenly, his voice unwavering. "That man has a right to be here with his service dog, and you have no right to treat him like this." The tension in the room escalated. The manager's face reddened as he tried to assert control over the situation. But now, with another veteran standing in front of him, the dynamics had shifted. James could feel the shift, too. The sense of isolation he had been carrying started to fade, replaced by the weight of solidarity. It was no longer just about him. The manager's eyes darted between the two men, but his bravado seemed to shrink in the face of the unyielding resolve standing before him. He took a hesitant step back, the phone still clutched in his hand, unsure of his next move. As the tension thickened, it became clear that something had just changed, something that could not be undone. The moment hung in the balance, and for the first time, the manager seemed to realize that he had underestimated the power of respect. But what happened next would reveal whether or not he was ready to accept that lesson. The room held its breath as the two veterans locked eyes. The manager, now visibly rattled, seemed to shrink under the weight of the new arrival's words. James could see the shift, the manager's posture faltering, the air of authority he had carried just moments ago now slipping away. The tension was unbearable, and for a moment, it felt like time had frozen. "This is a legal matter, not a personal one. You're well aware that service animals are protected under the ADA, and what you're doing right now is not just unprofessional, it's illegal," he said, his voice steady, but tinged with a conviction that only a fellow soldier could carry. The manager glanced down at the card, his confidence faltering even more. But he didn't argue. Instead, he looked back at James, who stood tall, his posture proud but not confrontational. The silence between them was deafening. Then, in a final attempt to save face, the manager muttered, "Fine. Just keep that dog out of my way." But James wasn't done. He looked the manager dead in the eye and said, "No, you don't get to dictate how I live or how I deserve to be treated. I'm not just here for me. I'm here for anyone who's ever been dismissed or looked down upon for something they can't control." The manager, now completely disarmed, didn't say another word. His shoulders slumped in defeat, the power dynamic completely reversed. The new veteran, his mission complete, turned to James and gave him a respectful nod. "You've got this," he said before walking toward the door. James stood there for a moment, letting the words sink in. The lobby felt different now, quieter, more peaceful, like the air had cleared. The manager, who had moments ago been so ready to assert control, now stood motionless, his face a mix of shame and defeat. But as James reached the counter to complete his check-in, the unexpected happened. The hotel's receptionist, who had been silently watching everything unfold, slid a key across the counter. "On the house," she said quietly, with a slight smile. "You've earned that right." James paused, taken aback by the gesture. It wasn't just the room that had been given to him for free. It was the respect, the recognition that had been so desperately lacking before. He took the key, nodding in gratitude. As he walked toward the elevator, he could feel the weight lifting off his shoulders. The journey wasn't over. He still had battles to fight. But for today, he had won. What he didn't know, however, was that the manager's experience wasn't over either. The moment the door to the lobby closed behind James, the manager's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his face drained of color. A name flashed across the screen. Asterisk, asterisk, the ADA compliance officer, asterisk, asterisk. The call he was about to receive would be a reminder that some lessons come too late, but never without consequence. As the manager's phone buzzed, he hesitated before answering, his hands shaking slightly. He took a deep breath and picked up the call. The ADA compliance officer's voice came through clear and stern, reminding him of the very laws he had just violated. The conversation was brief, but loaded with consequences. The manager could already feel the weight of his actions sinking in, realizing that his momentary lapse in judgment was now a serious legal matter. But there was no turning back. He would have to face the repercussions of his ignorance, and there was no way to undo the harm he had caused. Meanwhile, James entered the elevator, the key to his room in his hand, and let out a long breath. The adrenaline from the confrontation was fading, and a deep sense of relief washed over him. It wasn't just the victory over the manager. It was the quiet acknowledgement that he had stood his ground, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever been unjustly judged or misunderstood. As the elevator doors closed, he glanced down at his service dog, who gave him a reassuring look, as if to say, "We made it." In the days that followed, the story spread, gaining attention for all the right reasons. People in the hotel industry were reminded of the importance of respecting veterans, service animals, and the law. And for James, this experience wasn't just a win. It was a reminder that sometimes standing up for what's right can lead to unexpected, life-changing moments of support and solidarity.